The history of humanity is littered with chilling innovations, none more harrowing than the instruments of torture that sought to break not just the body, but the very spirit of their victims. In the shadowy annals of human history, ancient and medieval societies wielded unspeakable methods of torment to extract confessions, enforce obedience, or serve as grisly warnings to dissenters. These torturous practices reflected the darker corners of human ingenuity and a chilling disregard for the sanctity of life. In this video, we will delve into the most brutal torture methods of the ancient and medieval world, from the most shocking to most unthinkable torture. The Pear of Anguish. This small, seemingly harmless device concealed a horrific purpose. Made of metal and shaped like a pear, the contraption had petals that could be expanded using a screw mechanism. It was designed to be inserted into the mouth, rectum, or vagina, and once in place, the petals were gradually expanded, causing unimaginable pain and tearing delicate tissues. The device was primarily used on liars, blasphemers, and alleged witches, serving as both a tool of excruciating physical torment and profound public humiliation. Its psychological impact was as devastating as the physical agony, leaving victims traumatized and broken. Often, the mere threat of its use was enough to instill fear, forcing victims into compliance. This heinous device also reinforced the authority of inquisitors, who used it as a symbol of their power to silence dissent and punish perceived moral or social transgressions. The rack. The rack remains one of the most infamous torture devices in history, not only for its brutal efficiency, but also for its symbolic representation of medieval cruelty. Victims were tied by their wrists and ankles to rollers at opposite ends of a sturdy wooden frame. By turning the rollers, executioners stretched the body, tearing ligaments, dislocating joints, and ripping muscles apart. The cracking of bones and the agonized screams of the victim were often enough to extract confessions, regardless of their truth. Survivors, if any, were left permanently crippled, their bodies twisted into grotesque forms that served as grim warnings to others. The rack was not only a tool of torture, but also a method of public spectacle, used to terrify onlookers and reinforce the power of rulers or religious authorities. Its use was often sanctioned under the guise of justice, further embedding fear into the collective psyche of society. The Iron Maiden, a towering coffin-like chamber, combined the terror of confinement with the slow agony of impalement. Lined with sharp metal spikes, it was designed to pierce the victim when the door was shut. The spikes were carefully positioned to avoid immediate death, instead puncturing non-lethal areas of the body to prolong suffering. While historical evidence suggests it might have been more of a symbolic or propagandistic tool rather than widely used, its reputation has cemented it as an icon of medieval cruelty, representing the horrific lengths humans can go to enforce power and control. Rat torture. This method exploited the primal fears of both humans and animals. The victim was restrained on their back, with a cage containing a rat placed on their abdomen or chest. Heat was applied to the cage, forcing the rat to escape by burrowing through the victim's flesh. The sensation of the rat's claws and teeth tearing into the body was excruciating, and the anticipation of the rat's path added an element of psychological torment. The victim's screams of agony combined with the visceral horror of the act served as a grim demonstration of human ingenuity in turning nature into an instrument of unimaginable terror and cruelty. This method was not only physically agonizing, but also deeply dehumanizing, reducing the victim to prey for an animal. Its deliberate manipulation of primal survival instincts made it one of the most psychologically devastating forms of torture ever conceived. The Judas Cradle. The Judas Cradle was a device specifically designed to inflict slow, relentless pain while degrading the victim in the process. Victims were suspended above a sharp pyramid-shaped seat and gradually lowered onto its point, which penetrated the anus or vagina. The victim's body weight forced the penetration deeper over time, tearing tissues and causing unbearable agony. This method also led to severe internal injuries and a high risk of infection due to the lack of sterilization. Executioners could prolong the torture by repeatedly raising and lowering the victim, ensuring they endured prolonged suffering. The Judas Cradle was not only a method of physical torment, but also psychological degradation, as the victim was often exposed to ridicule by onlookers. The combination of humiliation and excruciating pain made it one of the most dehumanizing torture devices in history. It was a cruel display of power, stripping victims of their dignity and reducing them to symbols of subjugation. The breaking wheel. The breaking wheel, also referred to as the Catherine wheel, was a device infamous for its sheer brutality and public spectacle. Victims were tied to the large wooden wheel with their arms and legs stretched across its surface, leaving them completely vulnerable. Executioners used heavy iron bars to shatter their limbs one by one, causing unbearable pain as bones splintered and flesh tore. The broken limbs were sometimes woven through the spokes of the wheel, ensuring the victim's body was grotesquely contorted. In some cases, the wheel was mounted upright, leaving the victim on display for onlookers to witness their slow and agonizing demise. Death could take hours or even days, often resulting from shock, blood loss, or exposure. The breaking wheel symbolized the absolute power of the state, serving as both a method of execution and a powerful deterrent against rebellion or defiance. Its victims became tragic examples of the lengths to which authority would go to maintain control. The Scavenger's Daughter. The Scavenger's Daughter was a device specifically designed to compress the human body into an unnatural and agonizing position, making it a chilling counterpart to the more well-known rack. Victims were forced to crouch with their knees pulled tightly to their chest and their head bent downward. Heavy metal clamps were then secured around the body, applying immense pressure. As the clamps were tightened, the body was gradually crushed, causing severe pain and significant damage to internal organs. The constriction often led to internal bleeding, fractured bones, and suffocation, with some victims succumbing to the unbearable strain. What made this device particularly terrifying was its ability to inflict immense agony without leaving external wounds, ensuring that the suffering remained invisible but no less excruciating. This cruel invention was used to extract confessions or punish dissenters, demonstrating the lengths to which authorities would go to maintain control through fear and suffering. Saw torture. Saw torture was as brutal in its execution as it was simple in design. The victim was suspended upside down, a position that ensured a continuous flow of blood to the brain, preventing unconsciousness and prolonging the agony. Once secured, executioners used a large, sharp saw to methodically cut the victim in half, beginning at the groin. The process was deliberately slow, with each movement of the saw causing searing pain as it tore through flesh, muscle, and bone. The victim remained conscious for much of the ordeal, their screams adding to the psychological horror for any witnesses. This method was not only a punishment, but also a tool of intimidation, as the gruesome spectacle sent a clear warning to others about the consequences of defiance. Saw torture's simplicity and devastating effect made it one of the most horrifying forms of execution, leaving behind a legacy of terror and cruelty. Flaying, or the act of skinning a person alive, was one of the most excruciatingly painful forms of torture and punishment in history. Skilled executioners used sharp knives or specially designed tools to peel back the victim's skin layer by layer, starting from extremities like the fingers, toes, or face. The process was carried out meticulously to keep the victim alive and conscious for as long as possible. The exposed flesh and muscles beneath were highly sensitive, amplifying the pain with each cut. Death from flaying was not immediate. Victims often succumbed to shock, massive blood loss, or infections hours, or even days later. Flaying was not just a punishment, but a public display of dominance and control. In some cases, the victim's removed skin was displayed publicly, sending a grim message to others. This horrific method was designed to dehumanize its victims while instilling fear in anyone who dared to oppose authority. Impalement. Impalement was a torture method so cruel and horrifying that it remains infamous to this day. Victims were impaled on a sharpened wooden stake, which was usually inserted through the rectum or vagina and carefully driven upward through the body. Executioners took great care to avoid vital organs, ensuring the victim remained alive for as long as possible. The stake was often greased to facilitate penetration and prolong the agony. The tip would eventually emerge through the chest, shoulders, or mouth, depending on the angle of insertion. Victims were often left suspended on the stake, sometimes for days, enduring unimaginable pain as their bodies slowly succumbed to blood loss, shock, or infection. This method was famously employed by Vlad the Impaler, who used it to instill terror in his enemies. Entire fields of impaled victims were left as grim warnings to others, cementing Vlad's reputation as one of history's most ruthless figures. Conclusion: the devices and methods we've explored today paint a chilling picture of humanity's capacity for cruelty. These gruesome tools were designed not just to inflict pain, but to send powerful messages of fear, control, and submission. They remind us of the darkest periods in our history, when suffering was weaponized to maintain power and suppress dissent. While these horrors belong to the past, they serve as important lessons for the present and the future. It is up to us to ensure that such inhumanity remains firmly in history's shadows. Thank you for joining us on this harrowing journey. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content that delves into the depths of history. Together, let's uncover the past to build a more compassionate and just future. See you next time.